Good morning, 8th grade history class. Welcome back. I hope everybody's having a great weekend, enjoying some of your time off. We will be having a lot of time off coming up in the next couple weeks. Every day that we're out, I will be posting one of these videos online for you. It'll basically go over the assignments that you should be keeping up with, any kind of notes that you should be taking, any kind of reading that you should also be keeping up with. I will have most of the notes posted up here on the board for you as far as the notes that you should have for that particular lesson. Today we're going to be going over lesson 19.3, the continuation of the New Deal. But before we start on that, I want to remind you guys that you all were supposed to have some homework completed over this break. As your first homework assignment, you were supposed to finish page 67 and 68 of your map book. Of course, if you looked at inside of your regular book on page 274, it kind of goes along with the homework that you had, so it should have been pretty simple and easy to fill out. Make sure that you guys are giving that to your parents so they can bring it in for us here, and that way we can grade it for you and record it into your Jupiter grades and keep up with all of your grades. That way you know what you're getting as far as the break goes as well. Let's get into today's lesson. Today's lesson, like I said, is going to be over 19.3, the continuation of the New Deal. If you remember, the New Deal is the socioeconomic program of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president during the Great Depression and World War II. As the Great Depression hit, he instituted a social program called the New Deal, in which it was used to put people back to work, rebuild America, and kind of restart the American economy. And some of these programs that he implemented were mostly in the mid to late 1930s, and they are some of the programs that we still have in effect today. You were supposed to read from pages 312 to pages 315 for your homework, and then of course tomorrow you will also have a quiz over this information that we go over today, as well as the notes that you took on Friday, the beginning of the New Deal. So let's go ahead and talk about this. FDR in 1935 introduces what's called the Social Security Act, which establishes a fund for government, or by the government, for unemployment insurance as well as old age insurance. If you lose your job or if you are retired and you have no way to support yourself, the government will subsidize some of that through what's called the Social Security Act. In 1935, we have something called the National Labor Relations Act, which gave workers the right to actually form labor unions. Now, when labor unions form, they negotiate their contracts with the owners of the companies as a collective, as a group, rather than individuals signing their own individual contracts. They will negotiate as a group. This is known as collective bargaining. It's how labor unions negotiate their contracts with the company owners. In 1935, we also have the creation of the Committee of Industrialized Organizations. Essentially what that does is it takes labor unions and it takes people who are skilled and unskilled workers and joins them together. So all the truck drivers together, all of the welders together, all of the plumbers, and so on and so on. So what it does is it takes laborers, skilled and unskilled, and joins them into groups together, and then they're able to form labor unions that represent their job. A company that does not, or that only hires workers of labor unions is called a closed shop. It doesn't mean that the shop is closed. It just means it is closed to regular working folks that aren't part of labor unions. A famous labor union leader that we talked about was Samuel Gompers from the previous chapter, but there was another guy that rose up during this time in the 1930s because we have a rise of communism throughout the world, and even some here in the United States. A guy by the name of Gus Hall rises to prominence, and he will eventually become a communist labor organizer and eventually will form what's called the Communist Party of the United States, which has of course since been disbanded, for communism is not a legal party in the United States. In 1933, the United States finally gave recognition to the USSR, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics. It is the first time that we gave recognition to a communist country. Now, the USSR became a nation in 1922, but we didn't officially recognize it as a country for another 11 years until 1933. FDR also has a foreign policy, a way that he deals with other countries. Particular countries that he's concerned with are countries in Latin America or in South America, Spanish-speaking countries, countries that are in what's called our sphere of influence, or the Western Hemisphere. And these countries he wants to open up better relations with through economic trade. Rather than military assistance, we would actually trade with these countries, buy their goods, and they would buy our goods. This is known as the good neighbor policy, and it essentially means being a good neighbor to the countries that surround us. It is an international cooperation treaty between the 6 Latin American countries, and those 6 Latin American countries are the ones that you actually were filling out in your map book. There, you see them right there. Places like Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, and Panama. Excuse me. Finally, we have what's called the Lindbergh Law. In 1930, Charles Lindbergh, a famous aviator, his baby was kidnapped and eventually found dead. And because of this, there was a passage of what's called the Lindbergh Law, which essentially gave the death penalty in certain interstate kidnapping cases. And since then, kidnapping has been a capital crime if the person is kidnapped across several states or if it is found dead. Another important person during this time is Amelia Earhart. Some of you guys may have heard of Amelia Earhart. She is the first woman to fly across the Atlantic from New York City to Paris. She will eventually try to attempt to fly around the world, but will disappear on her journey, and she's actually never been found since then. But she is the first woman to fly across the Atlantic to Europe. Finally, we have Franklin Delano Roosevelt's cabinet members, which were kind of like Andrew Jackson's cabinet, the kitchen cabinet. The only difference is here they're called the Brain Trust. These are some of the smartest and most well-educated men in America at this time. And essentially what Franklin Roosevelt does is he joins them together and asks them, what ways can we fix the nation? What ways can we get out of the Great Depression? And so these are the men that come up with the socioeconomic programs that we talk about during the New Deal. They're called his Brain Trust. And one of the acts that they pass is for the betterment of workers all around the United States. And this is called the Fair Labor and Standards Act. And essentially what that does is it creates a 40-hour full-time work week, which means a full-time employee works 40 hours a week. Anything over that becomes overtime. We have a establishment of what's called a minimum wage, a minimum amount of money that you will get paid for working per hour. And then we have the abolishment of child labor. No longer are children under the age of 15 going into factories and mines and things like that to work. All right, this becomes illegal after that. These are all of your notes for section 19.3. I hope that you guys have taken these notes on your own. If you haven't, you can pause this video and actually take a look at them and write them down yourself. That way you'll know for sure if you have the correct notes or not. These notes, of course, go along with the quiz that you will have tomorrow. Now make sure that as I assign these assignments, you are doing them each day. You don't want to fall behind. They tend to stack up kind of quick. If you want to go ahead and work ahead of time, that's totally fine as well, as long as you're turning that stuff in when it's due. So tomorrow we will be taking a quiz, or you will be taking a quiz at home. This is not an open notes or an open book quiz. Make sure that whenever you're ready for the quiz that you remove everything around you, no distractions, and you set aside a certain amount of time. You would only need about 15 to 20 minutes to complete this quiz, so make sure once you start the quiz and you set that time aside that you're only focusing on that quiz. Since we're talking about the quiz, let's go ahead and discuss the quiz terms, which will be over here to my left. The quiz terms are for the upcoming quiz number 34, which is attached to your packet that I have handed out to you on Friday. It has all of the quizzes that you will have over the next 2 weeks, as well as any kind of reading assignments and homework assignments that you may have due as well. So let's talk about these quiz terms for the quiz that you have coming up tomorrow. The first one, of course, is the Brain Trust. We just talked about the Brain Trust. It deals with Franklin Delano Roosevelt's cabinet and their socioeconomic program called the New Deal. The 21st Amendment, we've talked about. The 21st Amendment deals with prohibition, the one side of prohibition where it repeals the previous amendment, the 18th Amendment, which prohibits the sale of alcohol, or known as prohibition. 21st Amendment repeals the prohibition. Next, we have the CCC, the Civil Conservation Corps. After that, we have the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, followed by the Social Security Act. We just talked about the Social Security Act. The Social Security Act establishes a government fund for unemployment and old age insurance. Next, we have a famous individual called Amelia Earhart. Of course, we've talked about her as well. She's a famous aviator. Followed by a guy named John Maynard Keyes. Now, this gentleman you probably read about on your own yesterday, on Friday, when you did the reading in section 19.3. He is essentially the man that comes up with the Roosevelt ideas of getting the country out of the Depression. Next term that we have is the TVA, also known as the Tennessee Valley Authority. Essentially, it is a project in Tennessee that was created to stop flooding, conserve soil, and bring hydroelectric power to the South, most specifically the states of Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Next, we have the Good Neighbor Policy. Of course, we discussed that already as we were talking about FDR's foreign policy and its relation to Latin American countries. The National Recovery Administration, it attempted to control wages and prices and to limit competition among businesses. And finally, we have what's called the Emergency Banking Relief Act. And the Emergency Banking Relief Act gave the president broad powers to control banking policies, to be able to shut down the banks if he needs to be able to influx the banks with money from the Federal Reserve if he needs to. So essentially gives the president the power to control the central banking system of the United States. Those are going to be the quiz terms for the quiz that you have tomorrow. Please remember that when you are taking the quiz, that you don't have any of other distractions around you. Make sure that you're being honest with yourself. If you need more time to study, take that time to study. Not everything has to be turned in every single day. So if you need a little bit more time, take that time to study. But please, please remember to be honest and don't cheat. I hope this kind of gives you an overview of what you can expect over the next couple days. I will be posting a video similar to this every single day going over the notes, and this will kind of prepare you for when we do actually come back. I want to thank you all for listening. I hope everybody stays safe and healthy. Please take your time if you need more time to prepare for these quizzes or tests. When you are ready, make sure that you're staying on task and staying free of distractions. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to talking to you all tomorrow. Have a great day, guys, and stay safe.